Anna, welcome. We really appreciate you taking a few minutes today to speak with us about this.
Thank you for having me.
So can you tell us when these evictions started and why they're happening?
So starting several months ago, a group of community organizers started pushing the city to stop the daily street sweeps, which is a practice we see in many municipalities of pushing homeless people along every day. And at a certain point, the local police department pulled out of those sweeps, and then the city refused to keep cleaning up the block. And after that, people started to have some stability, but also the city was no longer providing resources to help people keep their spaces clean and organized. So that's essentially how this got started. And at that point, community organizers were really pushing the municipality, the province, and other actors to support community-led safety. But instead of that, we saw this fire order ordering everyone to leave.
And the evictions have been described as a, quote, campaign of terror to decamp the tent city, end quote. Has there been any violence?
Well, there have been a number of violent arrests of people both living in that community and advocates supporting them on their behalf. And I think something that's important to note is even if an individual unhoused person isn't being violently arrested in this moment, when you tell somebody that their choices are to be evicted to nowhere or face the ultimate threat of VPD, violent arrest, and the seizure and destruction of all their possessions, that is inherently violent, whether it is happening to every person in this moment or it is just the acts constantly hanging over their heads. And you can feel that stress on the ground.
So what's the latest on the evictions today?
So the latest that I've heard, and I'm not sure if there's been something in the last couple of hours, is that there isn't a lot of communication coming to folks on the ground at this time. So things have slowed down a little bit. We're not seeing the same force and push against people every day. But nor have people been given any reassurances that the government or the fire department are going to move forward in a different way with people.
Anna, what are the people's rights here?
So there's a number of rights that are implicated anytime we're talking about evicting people to nowhere. There are the rights people have under the charter to have their safety and security of the person protected. There's good case law showing that constantly evicting people puts them in extreme risk of both physical and psychological harm. There's harms under local human rights codes concerning the rights to not be discriminated against. And obviously, as all your viewers will know, unhoused folks are overwhelmingly members of marginalized groups that are protected, including Indigenous folks and people with disabilities. And then there's all the rights that the Canadian state has signed onto but repeatedly refuses to actually uphold in international law that have regards to their rights to safety and security in their housing and while being outside, and rights to not be force evicted.
And lastly here, we're seeing evictions of unhoused peoples right across the country. Anna, what do you think is behind that?
I mean, ultimately, this issue goes back to colonization. It goes back to the history of genocide and seizing lands from Indigenous people and from systems of stewardship and collective care and pulling them into a colonial system of private property, which prioritizes individual wealth and ownership over that collective care. And what we're seeing is kind of this inevitable endpoint, and we're seeing it across this nation and many others right now. More recently, it's things like blatantly divesting from social housing by the federal government and every level of government refusing to actually do the work to protect existing housing stock and handing things over to privatization. So that is why we're seeing what we're seeing on the ground.
All right, Anna, we'll have to leave it right there. We certainly appreciate you taking a few minutes out of your day, like I said, and thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having me.